And I want to ask you, what does it mean to honor your parents?
So to honor your parents is not to repeat the sin that they did.
Welcome back to Exodus 20, the famous 10 Commandments, which probably a lot of people have heard about. There's even a literal movie called The 10 Commandments, which I still haven't seen. It's an old movie.
Neither have I.
It's apparently 4 hours long. Something crazy long, something like that.
People complain about the longest movie is like 3 hours. But no, then you have the Lord of the Rings extended version.
Which is 3.5 hours.
3.5.
And the Snyder Cut is 4 hours.
No, I still need to watch that.
It's actually quite nice. But anyway, let's not go into DC. This is the 10 Commandments. In Hebrew, it's actually called the 10 Words.
The 10 words. Okay.
And on the tablets, where was it written?
It was on the tablets.
But was it written just in the front?
Probably.
No, it was written on both sides.
Both sides.
You don't find it out in this chapter, but later on you find it out.
Okay, so how many tablets were there?
2.
So it was like five words on each side.
So it's not 10 literal words.
Not 10 literal words. Sorry, not 5 on the side. 2.5 on the side.
You could say 2.5 on the side.
If we're going very mathematically,
God wrote it with his finger. So how cool is that his finger would carve into stone, writing it in Hebrew?
Isn't that where it comes from? Set in stone.
Yeah. Yes, it comes from this.
Wow, because it was set in stone.
It was literally set in stone. It comes from Exodus 20. The 10 Commandments are very popular. Some would say it's controversial, but I want to take it in its original context, and it starts with, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Do not make an idol that looks like an animal. Do not worship their gods. And verse 7 talks about, do not misuse the name of the Lord. What do you think does that mean?
Blasphemy.
What is blasphemy? Because Jesus was accused of blasphemy by the Pharisees.
Yeah, so blasphemy is like claiming something that is not true or falsely accusing. Is basically lying in a sense.
Blasphemy is misusing God's name, like using it like a swear word, which is so sad that it happens a lot today. And they even have an acronym for blasphemy. And then...
What is the acronym?
OMG.
Oh.
Because it says, oh my.
Yeah.
And in God's name. Which is blasphemy, or people use Jesus' name as a swear word. Or they use Christ as a swear word. And... this is about having respect for God's name. Don't misuse it. And I had this thought that if you claim to do something in God's name, but it's actually sin, that's also a way of blasphemy.
Right. It's weird how people use blasphemy to swear. Let's say they don't believe and they use it. And it's like, why do you use it if you don't believe?
That's a great question. Because even though they use it as a swear word, there's weight to his name.
Yeah.
And it's funny because nobody says Muhammad as a swear word.
Yeah, it's weird.
But Jesus, his name has meaning. And of course, don't blaspheme his name because his name is disrespectful.
I would say that's some crumbs that there is a bit of evidence that if you don't believe that God is true, God is real, because... Why is the world actually using Christianity to mock on or use blasphemy instead of something else? And it's like...
It's an excellent question. Because now that you mention it, you know IMDb?
No.
Internet Movie Database?
Yeah.
It's a website. If you go to any movie, you can go to the Parents Guide and then look up profanity and things like that. Hello? And then... one of the things they would say is there's like so many F-bombs or there's the B word or whatever in the movie, and then it says Christ's name gets misused 3 times in the movie or God's name gets misused, and then that brings it back to your question. There's meaning to his name. Why is Jesus' name emphasized as blasphemy, but they don't say Buddha's name is misused or Allah's name is misused or Muhammad's name is misused? You don't get that.
You don't really
but
get
it's
that.
Jesus' name. that's being misused. It's a target on God.
Yeah.
So blasphemy is misusing God's name. And I said earlier that the Pharisees, those are the teachers of Israel, they said Jesus was committing blasphemy because Jesus said, I'm the Son of Man.
Yeah.
Son of Man is one of the titles of the Messiah, which is found in the book of Daniel. And Jesus was right to say, I'm the Son of Man.
Yeah, because
and they misunderstood him. Their hearts were cold. And it's still so ironic to this day that they claim to have known the scriptures, but when it came to Jesus embodying it, they missed it completely.
It shows you that you can know so well. In the end, it's not what you know what matters. It's what you do that matters.
Because you can know the Bible really well, but if you don't know God personally, if you don't have a relationship with Him, then the knowledge doesn't have weight.
Yeah.
You can know the Bible really well, but if there's no relationship, it's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing.
In fact, James says that hearing the word of God and not applying it in your life is like looking in a mirror, and when you walk away, you immediately forget what you look like.
Wow. And I also want to bring up the comparison with making jewelry, for instance. You can learn all the theory, but if you don't get behind the bench and make the stuff, you're not going to get better at making it. You will suck at making jewelry.
Exactly.
And it's the same here, that instead of striving to have all the knowledge and theory and stuff, rather just go in and do it, build the experience, because build the relationship, because you learn more as you go. Because with me spending more time with God, that's only when I start learning more about the word. Before that, it's like, okay, I know about the story and so on and so forth, but it's completely different when you actually go and delve into the word and implement it and all that things.
It's very true, because applying the word of God is so important. Not just listening to it and go, oh, okay. Because it has its weight when you actually apply it. And blasphemy is a big deal. And Jesus didn't blaspheme, they misunderstood him. And a lot of the things, it's literally perception, because they thought the Messiah would be someone who overthrows the Romans, but Jesus came to die instead for
They
us.
wanted him to overthrow the Romans, actually.
They wanted that, literally.
But he said, no, I don't want to.
Because in The Chosen, the TV series on Angel Studios, there's a free app, and you can go on their website and watch it for free. It's really good.
That's cool.
I recently finished season 4, and they spent a good amount of time of the people expecting the Messiah to be a military kind of Messiah that's going to overthrow the Romans, but then Jesus gets on a donkey, which is a humble animal, instead of a horse, which would have symbolized war.
And that just also shows you that we have this idea, idolatry, is that correct?
Idolatry is worshiping other gods.
No, ideology. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. So we have that idea and God, because we don't think like God. It's we paint this picture, literally. People paint pictures of Jesus, but we're not sure if he really looked like it. And it is just because we have this idea, but God just actually breaks those beliefs, ideas, whatever we have, the lies that we've been telling, breaks it down in unexpected ways, like riding a donkey. It's like, hey, I'm here to come in peace.
And he was there to serve others, not to be served.
Yeah.
So that's the interesting thing about how God sees things and how we see things. And then Jesus was never blaspheming. He was just, he fulfilled so many prophecies. If they actually just did their research, they would have realized he's the real Messiah.
They knew everything. They didn't want to admit it.
Sure, that's so sad. That shows that if your heart is cold and hard, then you can miss God entirely. Despite reading the Torah, which is the first 5 books, they started, I think, at the age of 5 or something, as a Hebrew
learned off by heart,
culture.
but there was no relationship.
Yeah, that's true. They knew it well. They did know it well, but they didn't know it well. if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They didn't internalize it. They didn't actually believe what was
they
going
know
on.
the essence in it.
Mm. And there's literally in Deuteronomy 18, Moses talks about a prophet that will be raised up, and that is Jesus. So there's so many hints, even in the Torah, about Jesus himself. But for the rest of the 10 Commandments, it talks about the Sabbath, keep it holy. On 6 days, God made everything. On the 7th day, he rested. Yeah. This principle is about resting regularly. And you don't necessarily, as a Christian, have to rest every single Saturday. But I think the principle is rest in God because of what he did for us on the cross.
Rest in God and not go and replenish and ask for forgiveness when you go to church.
Because the thing is, that's actually a good point, because God forgave you, full stop.
Yeah, he forgave you, and I like to put it that he rested on the 7th day because he wanted to admire what he made. Because God never becomes tired. So with the rest, he was actually observing and taking in everything that he has created. Yeah. Because what's the point of making something if you don't have admiration for what you made?
That's actually a good point.
So you need to set a time to admire what you've created.
That's true. It's the time of reflection, what I've done, and it's like making a painting or God literally who made everything.
And with that comes rest, because you also find peace in that. And okay, a lot of times artists are self-aware with being very critical and stuff like that. But I think that's the human side, because the godly side, because we want to create. If you think about it, which is also a godly trait.
Definitely.
And to rest is just to soak it all in and just admire.
Because this whole Sabbath thing is usually a day of rest. And then I had this question, okay, if Christians have their rest day technically on Sundays. I know there's like the Seventh Adventists, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but they have their gatherings on Saturdays, for example. Or I think Catholics also do it on Saturdays. But for example, charismatic churches have it on Sundays. But the people who work full-time at a church, their Sunday is their busiest day. They have to get there early, they have to set up sound, they have to do sound check, they have to set up the venue, they preach, they have to set the things down, they have to talk to people. There's so much work. And then I'm thinking, but then they're not resting on the Sunday. They're working, especially on the Sunday. So then this whole principle is Jesus became our Sabbath, and we rest in the fact that he finished the work on the cross. And you find rest in him. So then you can technically have Sabbath on another day than a Saturday or a Sunday. You have a day of rest, or, as you said, a time of reflection. That's what Sabbath is about. Just like God, he wasn't tired after creating everything, but he sat back and he reflected and enjoyed his creation. For example, I've been making a short film, and soon enough it will showcase at our university's premiere and stuff. And there, I as the director will be able to sit in the crowd and enjoy the movie. Because then I don't have to work. All the editing and things will be done by then. And I can sit back and literally just enjoy the movie. So it's that kind of principle, which is quite interesting. And then I'm very excited about this one, verse 12.
Actually thinking that the rest is also like it is done. And God's work was also for Jesus to die on the cross for us. It is done.
That's actually
so that was also a moment of rest when all that was done.
Yes, because actually that's a good point. It's resting in what God has done, and what he has finished was what he finished on the cross when he said it is done. Tetelestai.
Last breath. That's also, you give it a final breath when you go into rest.
Sure. Oh, when you die.
Not when you die, but also like when you rest, you give a nice sigh.
When you sit down, like, great, big day behind me. Now I can rest.
For instance, with your movie, it's like, it's done. You can now watch
that's true. That's true. Or when you have made an edit, or when you've painted something, or for example, if you bake cake, you can sit back and eat the cake. That's actually so cool. But verse 12 is one that I'm especially excited to talk about. It says, honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land Canaan, the Lord your God is giving you, which he gave to the Israelites. And I want to ask you, what does it mean to honor your parents?
So to honor your parents is not to repeat the sin that they did or
Okay,
do.
explain.
Okay, so a good example is you have, let's say, for some people it might be a touchy subject, but this is just for example. You have parents who are alcoholics, and by honoring them is by not repeating that lifestyle as you grow up. So it is by not being an alcoholic. Some people do it by not having alcohol at all or not drink because of the past. Because it's what you choose to do. You can repeat or you can break the chain of sin and not repeat. For instance, with money as well, you get people who complain or fight over money about the finances when the bills comes to pay need to be paid, and then you actually grow up to make more money, but then you end up still fighting. So then you actually need to delve into the word, what God says about that, and that's when you change your lifestyle by honoring. It's not by fighting it, but instead of going into a consuming mindset, going into a giving mindset.
Mm.
And that, I would say, in financial aspect, that's honoring your parents.
It's true, because honoring your parents doesn't mean you say yes and amen on everything that they tell you to do. Because what if you have parents that don't believe in God? Then their lifestyle is sin. If you do everything they say, then you're going against God. If you think about it.
Yeah. And our worldviews are created by our parents because they have a big influence. So that's where I want to say critical thinking comes into place, where you need to start thinking for yourself. Because at a certain age, from 0 to 20, we all lived at the same pace. We all went to school and had basically almost the same influence, our parents and circle of friends. And by the age of 20, that's only when we start to live our lives. That's when we actually need to start thinking for ourselves, because we're out of school. We're actually thinking of what's going on. So I think that's where the honoring part especially starts. It can start in school at a young age, but that time you're quite influenced and growing up because you're under the roof of your family.
But it's interesting because some people, that's also a touchy topic, some people have toxic parents. And how you can honor them is by not being toxic,
Yes.
which influences when you get married your family. You decide to be different than them.
But for instance, you have a toxic family can be like anything like gossiping to causing stress in the house all the time. And by just for those two things, even by honoring is just actually not causing unnecessary stress. And if there's stress, that like deal it in a healthy manner and don't gossip.
That's actually very true, and this just shows that this is actually the first commandment, or the only one that comes with a promise, so that when the Israelites move into Canaan, that they will live a long life. This is how important it is to honor God, your parents, but of course it's more important to honor God by not repeating their sin.
Yeah.
If you think about it. The rest is very short and to the point. You shall not murder, commit adultery, steal, give false testimony, or be jealous of what your neighbor has.
Sorry, I was thinking about the sheep.
The sheep.
When the sheep is stolen, so if you steal a sheep, you need to give a sheep back. But it's like, I didn't steal the sheep. It's like the sheep knows who stole it.
Oh, he's referencing the promised land. It was a goat. Where Moses says, even the goat know you stole the goat. That was funny, and that actually, that's quite funny. But Jesus actually spoke about these passages in Matthew, where he says, you have heard, do not murder, but if you hate someone in your heart, you've committed murder in your heart.
It's equivalent, because what you think is also the same as the action. If you think about it, because it's like two realities, but in your head, the reality, it's your reality.
And even this other one, you shall not commit adultery. Jesus said, even if you look at someone lustfully, you've committed adultery in your heart. That's quite intense. Where he says
Yeah.
in your heart, it's already done,
Yeah, because it's an emotion that you're actually expressing within yourself.
and it's outside of God's design.
Mm.
So these things Jesus took, and he didn't water them down. He actually raised the standard, where he says, if you just hate someone in your heart, if you just look
Yeah.
at someone wrong, you've committed adultery, you've committed murder in your heart. Then it raises the stakes.
Like, for instance, that's why you need to practice compassion, because that helps you to love someone instead of hating them.
True. Because if by loving someone, you actually automatically do these things. If I love someone, then I won't murder them. If I love my wife, I won't commit adultery.
You don't do things.
Yes. Yeah, I will do it out of respect. And after all these things, the people saw the thunder and lightning, verse 18, and they trembled with fear. But here's interesting. They stayed at a distance, and they said to Moses, you should speak, because we don't want to speak to God, or else we will die. And Moses says, but don't be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will keep you from sinning. But the people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was.
That already shows you that God wanted a relationship, but the people rejected him. So it had to go through Jesus dying in order to restore that relationship, because before that they had a slave mindset. And with the theory that they were maybe also influenced by the Egyptians.
Yes, that's true, because some Egyptians also traveled with them to the desert, and then we had a theory, especially with Exodus 32 coming up, that maybe some of the Egyptians influenced them to building the golden calf, which could have happened easily, because they worshipped the golden calf.
They grew up
instead.
a certain way, and what do we do when we're afraid or stressed, or we go to our old ways, old habits?
That's true. That makes me think of Peter. What did he do after he denied Jesus 3 times?
He went and repented, or said he was sorry.
No, before that.
Before that. What was it again?
He went fishing. He used to do fishing, that was his occupation, and then he went back to what he knew.
So it's quite normal to actually go back to what you were doing, and that's the hard part of not going back to what you used to do.
And then God doesn't want us to look back, because when you look back, you go off the road.
You go off the road, and there's a reason why the mirror is smaller than the window. And
that's why I always find it so ironic that with the South African driving system, every 6 to 8 seconds in the driving lesson, you should look at all 3 mirrors. And it happens so often that you look back. When can you actually focus on what's happening in front of you? Because I understand you look back when you change lanes and things like that. But most of the time when you're driving, you should be looking ahead.
Yeah.
There's no point in looking what's going on behind you, but then you don't see the car in front of you.
Yeah.
So that was also a cool analogy to explain it. And it was just interesting because the people distanced themselves from God instead of being close to him. And before this recording, I told you about Cain, who murdered his brother. God protected Cain and said, whoever wants to get back at you, they need to pay you back 7 times, which is completely. And then it says Cain walked away from God, and God was trying to extend grace. But even the very first murderer, he distanced himself from God, and these people distanced themselves from God. And we must be careful not to do that as well.
Yeah, it seems like it's very easy. It's easier to do that than staying close, even though it's going to be better when you're close.
And
very frightening.
It is, right?
Very, very frightening. Yeah, the lightning.
Bohemian Rhapsody. But this is just cool because later in Exodus 25 and 26, we will talk about the tabernacle and the ark and those things. And there was the curtain that separated the Holy of Holies. And when Jesus died, according to Matthew, the curtain tore in two, which showed that we have access to God.
Yes.
And that shows we can be close to him. And we actually have a bigger miracle than the Red Sea splitting. And that is Jesus who died in our place that we deserved.
Yeah.
And if you still distance yourself from God, then you don't understand the gospel. Because he especially did it to get you close to God.
Because your life also changes the closer you get to God.
That's very true. And then the rest of the chapter talks about do not make any other gods that looks like animals and so forth. And the last verse is actually, it sounds funny. It says, or the last two verses, if you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. And do not go up to my altar on steps, or your private parts may be exposed. That's how chapter 20 ends. And we thought about it that those at that time the people wore a cloak that was like a one-piece type of thing. They might not have had underwears at that
So
time.
at a certain point, just a gust of wind will just like
Yes.
feast your eyes.
And then it's like, oops. So God actually thought of that, honoring the people by not accidentally flashing the people, which is actually nice because he wanted them to be treated with respect, especially the priests who had to go make the altars. So by not having steps, they would have been honored and covered themselves. Because looking at someone else's nakedness is a like shamefulness in a way, even though in the context of marriage, like in Genesis, it says they were both naked but unashamed.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's actually sin that brought the shame.
Yes, sin does bring shame in a lot of things. It's not supposed to be. God doesn't want us to live in shame, but sin does tend to do that. It makes us feel guilty. It makes us feel distant. But with the Lord who died, he bridged the gap. He takes away shame. Yeah. And this was just. It sounds funny where it says, or also private parts may be exposed. But if you think about it, a wind could have blown and then whoops.
Yeah.
And then luckily there was no steps, because there's pictures online you can find about there was the tent. We're actually talking a lot about the tabernacle, and it's still like 5 chapters left and we get there.
Shall we stop here and just like
stay tuned. We can talk about it
when
we get there. So that is chapter 20.